Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. Now in this episode, we're going to take and share with you some information about how you can write your first .NET application, showing you real code, writing real services, and writing a website that accesses those services across different servers. But before we get to that, I've got a couple of housekeeping things I want to take and cover with you. First off, we actually do read the comments you guys leave down there at the bottom of the page. And a long time ago, we noticed that your most common comment was that you wanted downloadable versions of the show. So, even though I knew it's going to be like a 70 megabyte file, I said, okay, fine, we'll go ahead and prepare these downloadable files. And so we started preparing those, and I said, fine, that'll take and shut them up for a while because they're not going to want to download those 70 megabyte files. Well, you did. You downloaded them so much, and your next complaint was that you didn't have the past episodes downloaded. So we took some time, and we actually prepared the downloadable versions for the past episodes as well. So now all of the episodes of the MSDN show are downloadable. So if you haven't checked those past episodes recently, you'll now find those downloadable. Now, I'd like to thank a couple people for helping me with that. Erica Wiechers, who you know from doing the news update, did some work on making sure those downloadables ready, as well as Kelly Renner. And you'll hear more about Kelly later on in the show. Now back to this show. We're going to do a lot about technology and developing applications. So that means a lot of code. Now, remember, when you're watching the show, there's a little button right down there that says Show Transcript. If you click on that button, okay, the transcript window comes up over there. In the transcript window, you'll see the code that normally is going to be shown here on this screen, because I know you can't read the code when it's shown here in this window. So I don't want to see any comments from you people down there in the comment section about not being able to read the code here, because it's going to be over there, and there'll be a lot of code being shown. So stay tuned to the show, and hopefully you'll learn an awful lot about how you can write your first .NET application.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers. Welcome to the MSDN News Update. In March, Microsoft announced a new set of XML web services codenamed Hailstorm. The Hailstorm services take advantage of the .NET technologies and architecture and create an information architecture that is oriented around people and their data instead of around specific devices, applications, or locations. Through Hailstorm, users will be able to access things such as their calendar, address book, profile, and buddy lists from not only any place on the internet, but also from within almost any application. Programmers will leverage the power of Hailstorm by being able to better integrate the functionality of the applications they write with the various data services of the user. In early April, Microsoft announced the Design for Windows XP logo program. This new program will bring hardware and software quality standards under a single logo, making it easier for customers to recognize products that are designed to deliver the best computing experiences with the Windows XP operating system. Many retail channel partners have already demonstrated their support of the Windows XP logo program. Independent software vendors and independent hardware vendors are encouraged to develop their products to support the quality standards outlined by the Windows XP logo. Also in April, in conjunction with the Office Deployment and Development Conference, MSDN launched a new area of the Office Developer Center targeted specifically at Office XP. The new resource covers each traditional Office application, as well as the core technologies used in Office XP, such as Smart Tags or Office Web Components, through technical articles and samples designed to demonstrate and teach a specific area of Office technology. You can reach this new Office XP area through msdn.microsoft.com/office. TechEd is Microsoft's annual technical education event targeted at developers, DBAs, systems architects, and IT professionals. This year's event will be held June 17th through June 21st in Atlanta, Georgia, and will focus on web services and application integration. Attendees will learn how to develop and deploy web services and receive the latest information on supplier enablement, mobility, and integrated enterprise solutions. Industry experts will also discuss using the Microsoft .NET platform for next-generation applications. In addition to the U.S. event in June, TechEd will also be in several additional locations worldwide. Be sure to check out the show transcript for links to more information on these news items. And that's been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Developing .NET applications is increasingly becoming more and more important to companies. Not only does that mean understanding the individual technologies, like we try to show quite often here on the .NET show, but also just understanding what it means to develop a .NET application. What does it mean to you to actually write your first .NET application? To help us understand some of those issues, I've got some friends of mine here from SaltMine. They're a local internet services team. They focus on developing applications for the internet, for corporations, for individuals if they want to actually hire you for that sort of capabilities. So here from SaltMine, I have Jason Roos and Ian Hernandez. Thanks for joining me. Now,
thanks for having us.
Before we actually dive into developing the application, get our fingers dirty on some code, maybe you could help me understand a bit more about SaltMine and the sort of applications that they're seeing customers is actually needing on the internet, and how you're seeing approaching with .NET solving some of those problems.
Yeah, the applications that we're developing are typically business systems or additions to business systems. So in some cases, clients are coming to us asking to develop a new system to represent business processes. And in other cases, they may have existing information systems and they want us to extend them or to add something to it or incorporate some new product that needs to integrate with that existing system. The types of applications tend to be pretty broad, but in general, what they share in common is that they usually need to operate over the internet. They usually provide some sort of business function, and they need to be integrated with other types of services on the internet. If you look at that kind of from a narrow perspective, you could say that that's a single system with information and some design presentation. But increasingly what clients are coming to us for is integration with remote services, and so that's the tie-in for our show today, is to talk about the kind of systems we develop that might benefit from .NET, which would be in general distributed systems. There are also some other applications that we would use it for. For example, if we had an existing code library that was written in a particular language, .NET allows us to use other languages within that same project. But in general, the benefit that we're seeing, I think, is more of the web services model, distributed applications, communication of systems, sending data back and forth with each other over the internet.
So then for the most part, you're not actually, designing just web pages. You're actually developing applications.
Correct.
That are, doing databases, doing server-side logic, incorporating information from various sources, and doing reports for people and so forth.
Yeah,
like that.
The systems have been very data dependent that we've been developing over the last half decade. And what is happening is now that more companies are making available their own data on the internet for their partners and for their customers, we're seeing a greater demand for integration of all of that data into a single system. So a company might come to us and they may have partner information, supplier information, their own data, and they want to mix all of those together and present it themselves to the world or to their customers or to their partners, and consolidate and aggregate that. Whereas in the past, we would have had to have developed each piece of that in step from extracting data at a remote location, transporting it, understanding it, and then presenting it or integrating it with other services. Now, .NET abstracts so much of that away from us that the process of developing business applications over those distributed systems has gotten a lot easier for us.
And you've been around for how long doing this sort of stuff?
The company's a little over 6 years old. We've been developing systems like this since our beginning.
So, 6 years, that's as long as the internet is practically.
Pretty much,
so,
yeah.
That's the old timers in.
Yeah.
So, you've probably seen the internet change quite a bit during that time.
Yeah, absolutely. The focus early on was definitely on being there first, getting a name for yourself. That moved pretty quickly into being able to extend information about your company to your customers, and increasingly the concept of just being on the internet hasn't been enough to differentiate company A from company B. Now company A needs to be able to do something more cheaply, and people are looking at the internet not as a way of communicating outward, but more as a way of almost communicating bidirectionally. Not just with their customers, but with other systems, their suppliers. It depends on the particular business model, but the notion is that the companies are able to gain efficiencies using this distributed network that has been developing over the last, commercially over the last 6 or 7 years. They're able to use this to gain efficiencies and differentiate from their clients in a way that they were never able to before. So now that has been the primary focus of the systems that we've been building for the last few years.
So treating the internet not as a buzzword, but as actually a tool, and understanding what that tool can do for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Now, pretend for a second that I really don't work for Microsoft. Is .NET something that you're excited about?
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Now, remember, I'm pretending I'm not from Microsoft. So you don't
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. There's a couple of things that are really neat about it from our perspective as programmers and as a professional services business. I think that there's a lot of value that we're going to get out of the new set of IL libraries that everybody's going to be working from. All the new code from this point forward is all going to be compiling to the same single language. We're all going to be sharing the same libraries. So something we talked about earlier, we have C++ programmers that are going to be writing C#, and they're going to be working in projects very strongly integrated with developers writing in VB, or they're used to writing in VB and are now writing in VB.NET. So I think that's going to be neat on one end, but I think on the other end, and maybe more a little to the point of what we're going to talk about today, later, the web services model really is going to change a lot of things for us as an integrator and a developer service provider.
Why do you think it's going to change things?
Well, even though we're all connected by this big internet and we're all talking back and forth and sharing information and whatever, actually sharing information between programs and between systems is actually still pretty difficult. And there's a lot of proprietary stuff that gets written, a lot of, let's write a one-off this one time, you have a machine and I have a machine and we need to talk to each other. Well, let's talk about a protocol and let's talk about what we're going to write back and forth. And it's this really kind of elaborate bit of work, and I've seen it, in a number of projects we've built, electronic commerce, or maybe, data warehousing, or sharing information with customers, or between multiple nodes of a single business, where we've had to do a lot of kind of jury rigging and very, very custom development to get these systems to be able to talk to one another. And I think the really appealing thing about what web services are going to offer to us is that we're going to be able to programmatically talk to these other machines in our own applications in a manner that we're used to already programming. So I'm used to, instantiating some component, some object in line in my code and sending something to it and getting something back from it and just treating this local object as something I can work with on my local machine. But now all of a sudden web services is going to open up the arena and let that component be some other machine halfway across the world, or maybe just at a business partner, down the street, but then I'm not part of his VPN or whatever. So I think there's that expanding your kind of the milieu of your development to this kind of larger set, the whole internet, instead of just your machine and your local network.
.NET is also a representation of a certain way of communicating, and it offers a chance to distribute the burden of building a distributed system outwards instead of focusing on the person who's maybe integrating all of that information. So we have a company that is a wholesaler and a distributor of products, but they have numerous suppliers in some cases of the same products. And so for them to put an information system in place that allows them to communicate with their customers about things like inventory, the availability of goods that may be in shipment, they would need to build an information system in the past that integrated with each of the different suppliers of their product in the way that the suppliers maybe were dictating, and the way that they were dictating that may or may not have something in common with another supplier. So we run the chance of having to build different pieces of code or different points of integration for what is effectively the same kind of information coming out of different locations. What .NET and SOAP in particular, which is one of the protocols that it supports, allows us to do is define a common point of communication between these systems, so that a company can expose its data, and it's still particular to that company, but the format for how it is sent and received and used by the receiving application can be standardized in a way that lowers the cost of developing that system for that company, provided that their suppliers are developing systems in that way. A supplier isn't going to want to build 10 different systems for each of their wholesalers, but they may want to build one system that exposes their product inventory as a web service once for each of their 10 suppliers build it once and have 10 suppliers use it, or wholesalers use it.
Now, moving everything to this new model of web services.net, that obviously requires some changes, not only to your existing code you have, but also to your programmers. I mean, so what are you guys doing for training for your programmers?
Right now, we're focusing on getting exposed to visualinterdev.net. We're using ASP.net. We're using each of the different tools to develop prototype applications for what we might end up working on in the future. As clients are approaching us with opportunities to build systems for them, we're using .net as one of the available tools at this point, but our anticipation is that it's going to be something that for which there will be a lot of demand. It's something that's going to catch on. So we're trying to ramp up internally. We're looking to outside training as well. Microsoft has provided a little bit for us at this point, and that's been really helpful.
Yeah, there's probably not that much outside training available yet.
I think one of the things that is also going to be compelling about working with .NET in the future is that in a lot of ways, extensive training just to get up and working with these new languages is not going to, I don't see it as being a big necessity. There's some changes, there's some fundamental shifts in the approach, but the VB.NET, specific VB.NET implementation isn't so different than from the VB and Active Server that we're used to using now that it's going to be a big stretch for any of our programmers.
Our internal estimate is that a C++ programmer could probably learn C# in about a week. I feel a Java programmer could probably learn C#, maybe even in less time than that.
And in fact, really, I think it's going to enable, instead of locking programmers out by, oh gosh, they got to learn this whole new language, it's probably going to make things a little easier because they're already familiar with working with C, they're already familiar with working with VB, and by the way, both of those things can be used to produce the applications that our clients are expecting from us. So we're probably going to see more people having access and ability to contribute to these projects from our development base than less in the future.
It's opening up a developer who had developed something with JScript and ASP now has an opportunity to develop middle-tier components, which heretofore had not been available to them. And likewise, a C++ developer used to building COM middle-tier components now has the ability to take that all the way up to the presentation layer and incorporate that into ASP. So there's a little bit of a merging, and we can find that a language doesn't have to be a barrier as to what part of a system a developer works on. They can work on the part of the system that they're maybe best suited for in terms of their understanding of business systems as a whole, or if they have a particular interest in a particular area, or even if we're short a developer and we need to pull somebody from who's normally working in the back end and have them work on a component for the front end of a system.
You should still understand the model because it's still the same language.
Exactly.
Just, programming widgets on the screen rather than widgets on the server.
Right. The same set of underlying class libraries that they would use for ASP are the same underlying class libraries they'd use for using for C# for building an application. It's just what is it that they're building is really the only differentiator.
Plus, there's stuff like strongly typing that wasn't there already in VB that actually is going to be there now in VB.NET. That's just good programming principles, and we've actually been making our developers do that stuff anyway. Yeah. So it's not like they're going to oh no, I have to actually cast that. That's stuff they've already been doing. Now specifically, they're going to have to learn a couple of new functions and a couple of new calls here and there to make it actually happen. But they're used to thinking like that already because those are just good basic coding standards that we enforce.
Now, are you noticing many of your customers coming to you and asking you to develop a .NET application specifically, or? Some
of our customers who are what we'd call early adopters are talking about it at this point, and I think what they see is they've identified that this is going to be something that's going to allow us to build systems more quickly and cheaply for them in the future, and to open up the functionality of the systems that we can develop for them a little more broadly. What they're saying now is, how can .NET help us? And so we're talking to them about that and generating ideas. We're also coming to some of our customers and saying, we've been working on this system for years now, and it looks like there's an opportunity to use .NET for this particular piece here. Here's why this is going to be something that maybe wasn't available to the system before because it was cost prohibitive. Now it's not, and so let's talk about that.
There's also the other side of the coin when a client's coming to us and saying, hey, solve my problem. And we're analyzing that problem and saying, hey, here's a place where .NET fits in, or here's a place where this new approach is going to fit in. And so we're going to see some .NET development coming out of that as well.
Well, I know that we've got a fairly big session coming up next with the programming to show some of the code you guys have prepared to show here. So rather than taking and spending time focusing on the architecture like this, I think probably the next step is to actually take a look at some of this code and show some of our audience how they can write their first .NET application.
Absolutely. Cool.
So after this brief break, we're going to be back, and we're taking to show you actually how to write some real code with real servers, and you can see how you can write your first .NET application. So don't go away. Welcome to a special version of the diversionary tactic for this episode of the .NET Show. Now recently, Microsoft announced some new .NET services that we've codenamed Hailstorm. Part of the intent of providing these Hailstorm services is to actually allow applications and websites a better, tighter integration to user information so the user can have a much better experience as they're using the web. To help some of the people understand what Hailstorm is and the opportunities provided, we worked with a few companies to help them work up a sample or an example of their website and services that might illustrate the potential that Hailstorm has. One of those early partners that we worked with was Expedia, an online travel site. I thought you might be interested in actually seeing what their demo looked like, so maybe you can get a little bit of insight of what Hailstorm is and how it might change the way you use the web in the future. So here to do her Hailstorm demo of what Expedia might be doing with Hailstorm in the future is Susie Levine.
Thank you, Robert. So Expedia is a full-service online travel agency, air, car, hotel, cruises, packages, et cetera, and with $1.8 billion in gross bookings during calendar year 2000, we're one of the top 5 e-commerce sites, as well as one of the top 10 travel agencies in the United States. So for us, what we want to focus on is being a better travel agency. And in order to do that, services such as those that .NET provides us allows us to focus on our core competency and tie into things like authentication and notification services that are part of the .NET platform to be that better travel agent. But enough of my talking about this. Let me actually show you. So Expedia is taking advantage of the Messenger extensions that are available to us, and we've developed our own tab within Messenger. Now, traditionally, the instant messenger area has been about perishable real-time information, so we're taking advantage of that paradigm here. So, for example, if I see a terrific fare from Seattle to Tampa, where I might want to go visit my mom, all I have to do is click on that, and it will bring me into the site. In this instance, just so that you can see how we've actually tied in Passport into Expedia, we do allow you to link your Passport account. You can also sign in using your Passport account, enabling you to have a single password, which will be really pretty wonderful for those folks among us, like myself, who frequently forget our passwords. So I'll put in my password here, click continue, and I'm going to go straight into my itinerary that I have. You can see I have the flight booked, and at the bottom here is where one of the new services that will be enabled using the .NET services is facilitated. I change my notification settings, and I'm going to click on Notify Others. Now, a key thing here to notice is that with this, I have programmatically integrated my buddy list directly into Expedia. I didn't need to worry about whether or not I'd entered those people into Expedia. I didn't have to worry about creating an Expedia calendar. Instead, I've incorporated the people from my buddy list directly into Expedia. I can choose the notification settings. So for example, have my sister notified 2 hours before departure, have my friend Simon notified an hour before departure, and because I'm visiting my mom, I'm going to have her pick me up, and I'll have her notified an hour before arrival. Now again, so that they can plan around my trip, I'm going to add it to their calendar, and this is one of the future services that will be available in order for me to not have to worry about it as an Expedia developer to worry about developing my own calendar, but instead I can tie into it. I click continue here, and I'm going to go back and make my own settings, and because I'm a little bit flight retentive, I'm going to choose 2 hours before departure, and then I'm going to update my notification settings. Now here's where the fun begins, because Expedia, again, wants to focus on being a better travel agent. So in this instance, it's much more effective for us to go and get the flight status information, obtain that, and then send that message off to the .NET services. Now, let them worry about whether or not the person happens to be at their PC, or whether the person happens to be like my mom, might be out shopping and she might have her cell phone. So first thing that might happen is somebody might get the message. United Airlines Flight 1160 is running late, departing Seattle, arriving Chicago, giving you better information at your PC. Or better yet, what if my mom, again, is out shopping, maybe she's getting my favorite pot roast, and she gets this notification on her cell phone? Again, let Expedia focus on being a better travel agency and tie into the .NET services to provide better notification services in this instance, or before with Passport, better authentication. So thank you very much. Robert?
Well, thanks, Susie. We appreciate the time you spent with that demo, putting it together for us to help us communicate better to people what Hailstorm is and the potential it allows. Now, in working out that demo and understanding what Expedia means, what are some of the key benefits you think users will get out of using Hailstorm with a site like Expedia?
Well, again, Expedia is a travel agency, so part of what we're trying to do is to provide ongoing service to our customers. So with Hailstorm, for example, I pointed out being able to use a cell phone, being able to get information on your PC. We don't have to worry about where they are in order for them to get very real-time information, such as travel tends to be, whether it's a flight is delayed or all of a sudden fares from Seattle to Tampa drop to $1. Those types of things, we can notify our customers right away without having to develop a whole notification infrastructure ourselves. That's one advantage. Other advantages include, for example, the calendaring. A lot of people do family planning around their travels. Maybe they want an itinerary to put on the calendar. Those types of things will be also a big advantage for Expedia.
And the important thing there was that the calendar was not an Expedia calendar, but this was a general purpose generic calendar,
Right.
the same calendar the person's using in Outlook or an MSN Communities or any other website, and you're just communicating with that.
Exactly. What's helpful for us is that it does tie directly into what people are already using, as opposed to creating something that they're going to use once and then discard and find annoying later.
Thanks, Izzy. I appreciate the time you spent here on this.
My pleasure, and happy travels.
I will, don't worry. Now, hopefully that provided you some great information on what Hailstorm is and how a site like Expedia can communicate with Hailstorm to allow you that much better of an experience when using the web and the internet. Look forward to more information about Hailstorm in the future. Until then, pay attention to the rest of the show. Since the name of this episode is Your First .NET Application, obviously the primary importance that I want to show you is how to actually develop your first .NET application. And so that's why the first segment of the show wasn't as long as it normally is because this segment of the show is going to be a little bit longer. So hold tight, and hopefully you'll understand everything necessary to actually write your first .NET application. Now, Ian is going to actually be the one to do the demo for us, and Jason will just be on the sidelines there. You never want to start popping in a rude comment from time to time.
Rude comment.
Very rude comment. Now, when I first came to SaltMine to ask them to participate in this episode, I asked you guys to put together some sort of like a .NET application that was both simple, that would allow the users to quickly understand what's going on in the framework of one particular segment like this, but also showed the components necessary to be a true .NET application so they could actually take this information back to their offices and maybe develop an actual web service or .NET application. What actually did you provide for us?
Well, what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate how to create and consume some simple web services with .NET. And we've actually, for this example, we've created 3 fictitious businesses for our example. One is called Bookseller.
And that's up on the screen right here
Up
right
on the
now.
screen. One is called Book Reviewer. And the other is called Book Wholesaler. These 3 machines, just so you know, are in the studio are actually 3 separate machines, totally separate, networked together with a single hub, and we're just switching back and forth on a switcher here.
But now, ideally, the model is that these could be in totally different locations. They didn't have to be sitting here in the studio with us.
Absolutely, these could be anywhere in the world.
We came up with some fictitious locations too.
To drill down a little bit more on what these companies do, Book Wholesaler is a company in New York City that sells books wholesale. They don't want to deal with the retail market, and they don't want to be an internet portal, and they don't want to be on the web. They just want to sell books to their retail outlets, and they want to provide their customers with up to the minute information about the cost of these wholesale books. Okay. The next company is Book Reviewer. Now, Book Reviewer is a little company in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan that reviews books. Now, they don't want to deal with the retail market either, and they don't want to be on the internet, and they don't want to be a portal. All they want to do is review books and store their information in their little database and make that information available to their customers and partners. And then finally, the third company on our third machine is going to be Bookseller. Bookseller is a company in Seattle, Washington that wants to sell books to consumers. Now, they do want to be a portal, and they do want to be on the internet, and they do want to be on the web. They don't want to deal with being a wholesaler, and they don't want to have 1 million books in stock in their warehouse, and they don't want to hire book reviewers, but they do want to purchase these services from somebody else. Okay, so our example is going to allow book reviewer and book wholesaler to offer their information to Bookseller as web services. Bookseller will in turn consume these services, integrate them with some local business rules, and provide the sum of the three to its customers. And in our example, once again, each of these systems in each of these companies is on a separate machine. We're going to start with Book Reviewer, and they're a little company up in Moose Jaw, and they just review books. They have a simple system where they store their book reviews. It's a Windows 2000 server with SQL Server 2000 on it as well. And we're looking right now on screen at the SQL Server database for Book Reviewer. And there's really not much to it. It's just one table in one database, and it has 3 fields, and they are just an ID field, a string field storing an ISBN number, that's International Standard Book Number, and then their review that they've made of that particular book. They've only got 2 reviews because they're a small company and they're just getting started, but they're reading lots more books and they'll have more reviews soon.
This is probably where I should make a rude comment.
Right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to create a web service that's going to make these book reviews available to book reviewers' customers out on the internet. Okay, the first thing you need to do is create a place for this web service to live. So what I'm going to do is go into my inet pub directory, my www root directory, create a new folder, and call this Book Reviewer. Hope I spelled that right. Now, it's important, if we're going to make this a web service, to tell Internet Information Services that this is actually a virtual root. So we're going to go into Control Panel, Administrative Tools, and Internet Services Manager. And we are going to add a new virtual directory. And we're just going to go through the quick little wizard here. Book Reviewer. And I'm going to browse to the actual physical directory that I just created. There he is. Okay. I'm going to give him execute permissions. And I'm going to finish up. Okay. The next step in this process is going to be actually creating the file that will be the web service.
So right now he's already got the database on his system, so this is going to be like the interface to that database that people can access programmatically.
Absolutely. And I've got a version of this file already. I'm going to copy and put it on this machine. The extension of the file is ASMX, and that's the extension that denotes that this is going to be a web service. If we take a look at this in Notepad, there's not a whole lot to it. You're looking at the sum of the whole file right here. At the top, you see that we're declaring that this is going to be a web service. It's going to be with the Visual Basic Language. We're actually going to call the resulting class Book Review class. And the next lines you're seeing us doing some importing. Now, this is something a little bit new. These are namespaces. And what these namespaces do is give us access to libraries. Certain of these libraries are going to be used in the specific implementation of this class, and so they have to be present for the stuff to work. Here we are telling .NET that this is going to be a public class with one public function. So the class ends here, and Public function ends here. And the function is called getBookReview. The function's expecting a single string that represents an ISBN number, and it's actually going to return a string as well. On the next line, you're going to see some very familiar stuff. We're creating a connection object here. We're doing it with real typical data source information here. By the way, the salt mine IT manager or IT director made me promise to point out that we would never actually create a real production database that used SA and no password, and that you should never do this at home and actually come up with some, a good password and log in on your own. But just for the purposes of the example, we can just use SA no password. We don't have to worry about it. Now here we are declaring a string, and that string is real typical SQL, select review from reviews or ISBN, etc. And we've got the ISBN number embedded in that SQL. Now we're creating a command object. We've seen this stuff before. This command object is based on the SQL string and the connection object that we already created. And now here we are at a line where we've actually got some new information, and something we probably haven't seen much before. We're creating a new class here. We're creating instantiation of a new class here, and it's called a dataset class. Okay, now I don't want to go too much into datasets, but datasets are brand new with ADO, or ADO.NET, and essentially you can think of them as replacing what we previously used, replacing record sets that we previously used in just regular ADO, but they have a lot more functionality. The definition in the documentation of a dataset is a simple memory resident database. But from a programmer's perspective, I would describe it as a totally object-oriented data structure that can contain many tables of data. And those tables can be populated with information based on the results of a query. So in this particular example, we've created a data set, and then we've filled this data set with information, with a table of data that's being returned from this command object. And we're going to call the table that's being created in here reviews. Okay, here we are declaring a new string. And here we're actually doing some checking to see if there's any records returned by this query, just a little bit of error trapping. And you see us actually programmatically accessing data in the data set here. So we're looking in the data set, going into the tables collection in the data set, identifying the reviews table in that tables collection, going to the rows collection in that particular table, and accessing the count property. And if count's bigger than 0, then we know we got a record back. Otherwise, we are going to say that we got no data. Now let's take a look a little bit closer here. We're actually pulling if we did find a count in that row, we're actually pulling some data out of the data set into a string. So you're looking at the dataset object again here, going to the tables collection, finding the reviews table in the tables collection, going to row 0, that's the first row in the collection, finding the data that's stored under the review column in that row, and we're casting it as a string. And then at the end, we're just returning this string. So that's the result of the function. Now this is a pretty typical class. There's some new techniques here, there's a few new things, but the really kind of strikingly different thing about this that we haven't discussed yet is this web method attribute in the function declaration. And what this is really doing is telling Internet Information Services that this function is going to be available out on the Internet as a public web service. And this is really all you have to do to make it available.
But you're not declaring anything about the function at all. You're just basically saying this is web method, just a simple declaration.
That's it. So now Internet Information Services, in conjunction with .NET, knows to say, hey, this is a web service. Let's not just make this available to COM programmers on my local machine, but let's make this available to people out on the Internet who want to subscribe to my web service. Okay. So now I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. Microsoft has been good enough to provide a simple GUI with web services. So when you request a web service with from a browser, there's actually a little graphical representation of that web service that you're going to see.
So this bookreview.asmx file that you're going to in the browser here, that is that text file we just saw in Notepad.
Absolutely.
And so now you're browsing to this text file, Notepad, but this doesn't look quite like a text file. Matter of fact, there's practically nothing on this page that you had in that text file.
Absolutely, and because we declared it as a web method and we stored it as an ASMX file, Internet Information Services knows, hey, this is a function in a class that we're making available to the whole world. So let's treat it as that and let's show that to the world. Let's show an interface that describes that function. And that's what we're seeing here. This is a standardized interface. You're always going to see the same thing. You may see more information here depending on the size, how many functions and methods and properties are in your particular web service. But in this case, we just have one method, and it's the get book review method. If we click that link, it'll take us down to that particular method, and it even gives us a little form here to test out what happens when you pass some arguments into this particular web method. So I'm going to type in an ISBN number that I know. I made up some fake ones for this particular demo, and I'm going to invoke this method. Now, what does it return? Some XML. And the XML is pretty simple. We're just returning a string here, so all we see is this particular review. This guy really liked the review of this particular book. Okay. This is pretty much all we need to do to get a web service up and running and sharing information. It's not particularly useful until we start actually subscribing to that web service and consuming its services, but this is really all you need to do to get the guys at Book Reviewer up in Saskatchewan up on the internet and sharing their information.
So the book reviewer then was paying attention to what his core competency was, which was reviewing the book, and somebody said, okay, so what then is the information that someone else is wanting from me? Oh, here's my book review. And so he then exposed a function that said, give it an ISBN number, I'm going to pass back a book review for that, and by doing as a web service, he's basically done. He doesn't have to have some sort of deep relationship with that other company to help them understand things. He's just got this standardized interface.
Right, and by having .NET in place, prior to using .NET, that function would have been accompanied by some display information, probably to format the text as XML, but more likely than not to just print it out in some way that another application could read. And by doing it with .NET, it's printing out in XML, and it's compatible with SOAP. So any application that wants to hook up to this, that's formed an agreement with this company, now can programmatically access this data instead of having to do custom development just for those points of integration.
Okay.
So we're going to move from Book Reviewer onto a slightly more complex example with Book Wholesaler. Okay, now it's important to know that we're at a different machine. We're no longer in Loose Jaw. Now we're in New York City. We're and actually in this...
That was a quick trip.
It's the internet. Speed of thought. And actually in the studio here we have a whole separate machine, whole separate install of Windows 2000, SQL 2000, etc., etc. So here we are looking at Book Wholesaler. Now, Book Wholesaler has a lot more information and actually a much more complicated database than the guys up in Loose Jaw, because they're actually storing information about their wholesaling business. And you'll see they've got IDs, they've got titles, types, published price, all this stuff. And by the way, we added some ISBN numbers in here.
You'll probably recognize this as the as part of the Pubs database that ships with SQL Server.
We figured it'd probably be easier to just work with Pubs because everybody knows it. It's been coming out with SQL forever now, and developers are probably pretty familiar and comfortable with it. We did add an extra field, though, the ISBN number. Now, as it turns out, Book Wholesaler wants to share some of this information, not all of it, because they actually don't want to talk about what the royalties this employee versus, or this writer versus that writer gets on their books. They just want to talk about the ISBN number, the title, and the price of this book. Okay, so what we're going to do is make this wholesale information about books available to wholesalers' customers by way of a web service. And this is going to be exactly the same process as with Book Reviewer.
So since we've already seen some of this stuff already with the Book Reviewer site, probably don't need to go through everything quite as much detail, but maybe you want to show us just a little bit of the code that's unique to this particular site.
Yeah, okay. So we've already created a physical directory and mapped a virtual directory to that, and we've placed a file in there, in that directory, and that file is bookwholesaleinfo.asmx. This is the same extension as the last web service we created, and you're seeing a lot of similar stuff in this file from the last example we did. Again, we're calling it a web service. We're saying it's in Visual Basic. We're saying that the class is the Book Wholesale Info class. You see that we're importing a bunch of namespaces here that's giving us access to libraries. Here we're defining our class, Book Wholesale Info class. And here we've got a public function that we've created, the single function for this particular web service. And you can see the web method attribute once again. And this particular function is called get wholesale info, and again we're accepting here a string representing a single ISBN number, but the real different thing here is that we're returning not just a string, not just a bool or an integer, some simple data type, but we're actually returning something a lot more complicated. We're returning the data set. We're returning the whole data set this time, which is one of the really cool things about ADO.NET and web services.
So what exactly is different? I mean, how is that more important?
Well, a data set is a whole structure of information that's describing data, that's storing data. It can be multiple tables of data. It could be hundreds of fields. It could be all this kind of stuff, or it could be very simple too. And it is essentially completely replacing and improving upon the record sets that we've been used to working with all this time in ADL.
So it's not just a multidimensional array that's coming back.
No, quite a bit much more stuff.
Much more akin to an XML document. It can contain a schema, a header that describes the content you're about to see, and then structured content or data underneath that. So there's a strong affinity between XML, which is the underlying format for the data moving back and forth, and the data set structure itself. They both use the same kinds of concepts of object-oriented access to properties of different, sub-properties of the structured data.
Okay.
So we're sending this entire data set back across the internet when we return this, when we execute this function. And again, inside this function, you're seeing some code that's pretty darn similar to the last web service we created. We're creating a connection. We're doing some data source information. Oops, here. And again, boy, I'm batting 1,000 with that.
I see that same old user ID and password
yeah,
right there. You must like that enough for one.
Yeah. So don't do that at home. That's bad, but it's okay in the demo. And then we're creating a string here that has a bunch of SQL in it with an ISBN number embedded. We're creating.
Let me jump in here. I'd like to point out that what's different about this SQL query over the last one is that we're returning 2 columns. And so if we were returning just a string, we would have to put some kind of delimiter in it, and then whoever was using our web service would need to know what that delimiter was and how to parse out 2 values out of a single string. Again, with a data set, we're able to format it as structured content and say that a title and a price go together, and it's the same thing. And so you can access that programmatically on the other end by calling out each of those 2 properties of that particular set.
Here we are creating a command object again with the SQL and the connection. And then here we are declaring a new data set. And here we are filling that data set, naming the table that we're filling, wholesale info. And then we're returning the data set wholesale to the user of our web service. And so let's take a look at what that actually looks like. And the graphical user
Called the web browser.
Yeah, sure. And so this is what it actually looks like. Again, it's going to.
So again,
compile for a
you're
second.
going back to the text file that we just got through seeing, and because IS understands that this is a special kind of text file that's exposing a web method, it says I'm going to take and actually prepare you a special interface that exposes what the different properties are, or the different methods you can call and that sort of stuff, and some documentation to like actually test it all out.
Yeah, an actual test interface.
You'll also notice that while we were talking, this page was loading, and the reason why that call takes so long is because the first time you try to access an ASMX file, IIS calls upon the .NET framework to start assembling that into some intermediate language code, and so it's essentially compiling it the first time you access it. If you were to refresh the page, it'll come up a lot more quickly.
That's right, because Ian didn't compile that
He
text
didn't
file.
compile it.
Right.
No.
No, they're compiling for me here, which is great. So it's the same interface that you've seen before. It looks very, very similar. We're accepting a single string here. We're responding with a data set, which is a little different. And we have, the again, a little test form here. I'm going to fill this out. Ooh. And I'm going to invoke this method. And we'll come back with a full data set here. Now this is a lot more complex than what we saw last time. You're seeing a whole XML document here that's doing stuff like saying that this is going to be a string, price is going to be decimal, this is referring to this as an unbounded data set, and then you're actually seeing some data down here. Now, if we were doing multi-rows of data in this data set, you'd see this kind of repeated over and over and over again. But for this particular case, we're just getting one back. This is interesting, and you can look at it and have fun with it, but the underlying processes of SOAP really handles all this XML for you. So you can look at this, it's neat to know, but really you don't have to worry about it too much. The data set that's returned is automatically translated and interpreted into a data set that you can work with in your code once you get a hold of it.
So if the code on my server that I was requesting this data from, if I said, you know, I'm going to ask for a data set, I can just treat it just like as a data set object and not even have to pay attention to any of this stuff.
Absolutely, and that's one of the really cool things about .NET. We'll get a little bit more into that later on. So here we have another web service that's now offering up, very simply, some data about the underlying system. In this case, it's wholesale info, and essentially we have two companies now offering these services, and we now need to create a third company who's going to consume these services.
Okay.
So what we're going to do is switch on over to box number 3, which is a little entrepreneurial shop in Seattle, Washington, and these guys are a bookseller, and they are on the web and they sell books to retail customers. Okay, and again, it's important to realize different machine, different install of Windows 2000. In this case, we don't have a SQL database because we don't need one for this particular example. Okay.
Although if they were going to actually sell those books through the system, if it was an electronic commerce system, they would need one.
Yeah.
But it's important to point out that the system that we're going to be building now could be part of a commerce system to sell books online, but it could just as easily be at a point of sale, so that if somebody came and asked about a book and the person at the bookstore had never read it, they would have access to the retail price and to the book review inside of the store. The same code, the same web service would be consumed by two different applications, but you would, the producers of those web services would only have to write those services once for each of those once, and then it would be in turn used by two different systems.
So what I'm going to do is go and create a physical directory for my application that's going to consume these services. I'm going to go and build a physical directory for it to reside in. We're going to call it Bookseller, and this is actually going to be an active server application. We again are going to tell old Internet Information Services that this is a virtual directory. Hello, wizard. There you are. Okay. And we're going to give it execute permissions again. And we're finishing up. So now we've got a, local directory where we can do some work and build a active server-based application. And I'm going to bring in some code that I've written already for Bookseller. And we'll take a look at that code in Notepad for simplicity's sake. Okay, so here's our first file that's involved in the Bookseller application. It's just a simple form and just allows us to input the ISBN number and have it passed on to the next active server page. And that looks pretty much like this. Okay. We've seen this kind of thing before. Now we're going to build the next file that's actually going to, we're going to take a look at the pre-built code for the next file, which is actually going to do all the integration with web services, etc.
So this is the file that is providing the action for that form.
Yes, exactly. And this is the file that will be subscribing, actually consuming the web services offered by our other two companies, Book Wholesaler and Book Reviewer. So this is an ASP-X file or ASP Plus file. You're seeing a lot of stuff in here that you'll probably recognize from normal active server development as we know it now. We're declaring a page language up here, etc. So moving down the page, you're seeing some namespaces imported here, and we've already talked about that earlier in the talk here. And we're in this case, we're importing a namespace called system.data, which gives us access to libraries that we need to be able to play with data sets. And then you're seeing something a little bit different here. And this is where we're importing some new namespaces that might seem familiar from our experiment we've been doing already today, but these are not standard .NET namespaces. And in fact, what these are namespaces that are going to point to proxy classes. Now, what's a proxy class?
I was just going to ask that question.
You and I, like this. A proxy class, there's probably a really good definition somewhere, but the way I think of it is that a proxy class allows us to code locally against a remote web service, and by proxy. Hence the term.
Hence the name.
Hence the name. And what we're going to do is actually set up this book review proxy class to demonstrate this. So the first thing you have to do in order to build a proxy class to a web service is find out what that web service is expecting from us and what we can expect from that web service in return. So we're going to go across the internet to Loose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and we are going to take a look at bookreview.asmx. Now you guys have seen this before. This is the web service that we created for book reviews. Something that we haven't looked at up to now is the SDL contract, and that stands for Service Description Language Contract. And essentially, what this is saying, hey, this is what you're going to send us, and this is what you're going to get back.
So it's just an XML data stream.
Exactly. And again, this is the sort of thing that if you want to, look at it, read it, find out about it. It's very interesting. But because of the way that SOAP handles this for us, we don't actually have to spend too much time being concerned with the specifics of the data in here. And in fact, we can just take this file as is, save it to our hard drive, and start using it as our SDL contract. And I'm going to save this to the local hard drive and call it bookreview.sdl. Okay. Bye-bye. Okay, so now I've got the software description or service description language contract on my local machine, and what I need to do is actually create some local DLLs that are going to use this SDL contract to subscribe to the web service that we got the SDL contract from. And what we're going to need to do to actually make this happen is go down to the command line and run some command line utilities. Now I've already got how to do this stuff.
You're really doing anything you can to avoid too much typing, aren't you?
My typing's really bad. Let's see, book review. Here we go. And we're going to go over this line by line, what it actually does. I think I'll go over it line by line, actually here in the in this text file for starters, just so we don't have to see it in the smaller font of the command prompt. What this is going to do for us is execute the web service util application and tell it to create a proxy class for us based on the bookreview.sdl, the one we just got, and it's going to be in the VB language, and we're going to create a namespace based on this SDL called the book review namespace.
And so that's the same namespace that you defined in your ASPX file saying imports.
Absolutely, and this is what we'll import to get access to this proxy class. Now I'm going to go on down to my directory, and I'm going to copy and paste this stuff into the DOS window. Okay, what we've just done is we've created a new file called bookreviewclass.vb. Now this is an uncompiled Visual Basic file, and what it contains, take a look here, is all the information necessary to actually make this connection and use SOAP to actually talk across the internet to this web service. One of the big things to bear in mind about this file is that it's auto-generated. That means that command line that I just executed used that SDL contract to automatically build out all this code. And I don't really, as a programmer, need to worry too much about it. Now, you can get in here and have lots of fun adding extra stuff to it. I played around with it a little bit. You can add security and all kinds of stuff. But the basic implementation of it, you can just take straight out from the from what Web Service Util creates for you, and you can start using this.
So what this is basically doing is making it so that all the code necessary in order to connect to the internet, convert from SOAP and back to SOAP again, while it's making the connection to the other servers, is happening through this DLL,
Absolutely.
through the libraries being supported by .NET, so that your VB applications don't have to do any of that stuff at all.
Absolutely. We're not quite done yet because this actually needs to be compiled before we can actually use it. So what I'm going to do now is actually compile that, and I'll show you the code that's necessary to do it. Oh, also, by the way, I need to create a place for the compiled files to live. And they like to live in a little folder called bin. Here we are. We're going to use the BBC or Visual Basic compile utility to actually create the DLL that we'll use for the proxy class. What we're saying here with these options on the command line are that we're creating in the bin directory a DLL called the book review namespace DLL. We're telling BBC that this is going to be a library. We're saying also please include these other libraries. These are the dependencies that we need to actually make this DLL work. And we're saying base your output on the bookreviewclass.vb file. So I'm going to copy all this and come down to my command line prompt here, paste it on. That's the wrong thing.
Get all of it.
Huh. Try this again. Okay. There you go. We're going to run that, and what that's done for us is created a new DLL called bookreviewNamespace.dll. This is a proxy class that we can use now. I'm going to take a minute to actually register the book wholesaler proxy class, and so we can use both of them in our code, and then we'll come right back.
So now, obviously, in the case of expediency, we don't want to have to go through all the same stuff we did. So we've actually pre-prepped going to the other wholesaler file, getting the SDL, compiling it, and getting everything ready now. Now, being a Notepad user myself an awful lot for doing HTML files, I appreciate using Notepad, but I've got to remember that VS.NET, Visual Studio.NET, is available, and if we'd done this in Visual Studio.NET, would have been as process laden to go out and get the STL file and have to compile it and all this sort of stuff?
Actually a lot quicker with Visual Studio.NET. I think the rationale for approaching this with Notepad is to show the kind of stripped down, here's your baseline, you guys can think on top of this foundation approach to our developers out there, and then and show them exactly how things are being created and how the files and the DLLs are being written and where the SDL contracts come from and what they contain. Reality is, with Visual Studio.NET, you're going to do a little wizard called Discovery, and it's going to find the SDL information for you. It's going to register, Visual Studio.NET is going to register these proxy classes for you, and it's really going to be pretty seamless. So actually, if we were using Visual Studio.NET, a lot of this stuff would be a lot faster and would kind of just happen for us behind the scenes.
In fact, if we were using Visual Studio.NET, it would probably obscure the whole purpose of this demo, which is to show the creation of code that represents the web service, because at the point that Visual Studio.NET discovers the services out there, it starts doing things like showing it in your class view, doing autocomplete, and it really treats the web service like it's any other class library on your system. So the difference between a class library that comes with the .NET framework that represents WinForms or it represents data manipulation is as easy to work with a web service as it is with these native services.
So you're saying Visual Studio.NET makes it too easy?
It makes it too easy to demonstrate the underlying complexity because it's so abstracted away from development.
I know, like, when I'm talking to people about developing web pages, stuff like that, I prefer to use Notepad rather than something like Front Page, because you really don't understand what the web is all about if all you're doing is using Front Page and WYSI tools.
Right.
And so, I appreciate the fact that we're actually showing what's really going on behind the scenes here.
Right. And when it comes time to actually develop a web page, you're more likely than not to use a tool like Front Page.
Right. Actually, I still use Notepad. But
Okay, well, moving right along, so we just created some proxy classes and actually compiled the DLLs based on those STL contracts. And now we're looking at where we left off in lookup.aspx, where we're importing some namespaces. And what we're doing here is actually just saying, hey, we want to have access to that proxy class in this page. We want to have access to this proxy class in this page as well. And the next step is really where it starts to get interesting. Here we are declaring a new object as an instantiation of the book review class. Now this is just like any other class, let's say as a dataset class, or you wanted a decimal class, or whatever it was. You're creating a new instance of it here. We're now creating a new instance of the class we created based on that web service, and in fact the proxy class. Let's unword wrap here. Okay. And on the next line, the magic's really happening. We're creating a string here and declaring a string and initializing it with the book review class, proxy class, calling the getBookReview method with, in this case, the ISBN number that we passed in from the request object. Active server programmers know all about the request object. And when we actually execute this method, we are talking to our proxy class, using SOAP to go across the internet, talk to that web service we created up in Loosejaw for the book review, query their database, return information via SOAP all the way back across the internet to our proxy class, and then return that string to our code just as any other string that we might use or declare in our code anywhere. So this, we've essentially treated this remote web service as a component that we can program with locally on our machine, just like any other component on our machine.
So like in 2 lines of code, almost specifically just 2 lines of code, you're able to do a lot of stuff that were in the past. I had to create a connection object, open the database up, do a SQL query against it, and all this sort of stuff. And every single ASP page I would do would have to have this exact same code over and over and over again, where we've just done this with 2 lines of code, and the only time that SQL query happens is back on the original server.
Absolutely, and that's really kind of a best case scenario. I mean, you're assuming there that this other company in Loosejaw actually wants to share their database with you, and they want to be on a VPN with you, or they want to let you do SQL queries over TCP/IP. They may not want to. They may just want to say, you know, you're going to get a weekly email of our Excel file. You have to deal with that or something. Or maybe you have to develop your own custom special protocol for talking back and forth. This really opens a small window into their system and their database and gives us access to that information, and very, very, very seamlessly. So we don't really have to intrude too much upon them. We don't have to spend too much time debating protocols. We can just start programming. Now, that's pretty cool, but it's really kind of pales in comparison to the next line here. This is the thing I think is really neat. Here we are, once again, declaring a new, I just prefix these with WS for web service, declaring a new instantiation of a proxy class to a web service, and we're calling this one, in this case, book wholesale info class. So we're talking to New York City here, and we're actually, as you remember, we're going to get back a data set from this, which is a heck of a lot more going on. And so here we are actually declaring a new local data set, and we're going to this wholesale info web service and executing the get wholesale info method, passing it in the ISBN number that we got out of the request object. And again, what's going on here is we're talking that local proxy class. He's using SOAP to go all the way across the internet, talk to that web service. That web service knows I'm going to query this database, make a data set, return it to the web service. The web service is going to shoot that back across the internet to us and in SOAP and via SOAP, and then we will receive that, automatically translate it and interpret it and turn it into a local data set that's available for use on our local machine as a data set, just like a data set that we could create from querying a local machine. So I have a SQL server maybe on this same machine. I query, get a data set back, bam, I can start working with that. I can access methods and properties and collections and all this good stuff. This is the same thing. I'm getting this data set back all the way from New York in this case, and it is just as ready to work with, just as programmable, has just as many properties, methods, collections, etc. available to me. And that's the really exciting thing about this web services and SOAP being integrated together. We can actually program with complex entities like data sets across the internet with very, very, very little setup of protocol and methods of talking back and forth.
Over time, the maintenance is going to be a lot easier on this web service, because if they decide to add more information to the web service, let's say they want to, in addition to the reviews, they want to add the name of the reviewer as maybe their reviews become famous and the reviewers have a certain notoriety. In those cases, if
they review more than 2 books.
And they review more than 2 books. They're really burning. In that case, instead of having to maybe add another structure at the end of a serialized piece of information with delimiters that they would have to do, and then we would need to modify our code, we could actually probably just end up ignoring that extra information until we wanted to do a next rev of our system, because it's just an extra property of an object, and whether we use that property or not is inconsequential. But because the transport of that data and its association with the greater object is hidden from us and hidden specifically from our code, we don't need to account for it. We don't need to suddenly add the number of data points that we're looking for. We don't need to make that 3 and then ignore one of them. We can just ignore it because it's just part of the underlying class.
Moving along, it's all pretty straightforward from here, really. You're seeing us declaring a new string here for the title, and we're programmatically accessing this data set, this instantiation of this data set, and we're going into the tables collection again, looking at the wholesale info table. Remember, we created that on our web service way back in New York. Going to the rows collection, to the first row in the collection, and asking for the data that's contained at the title column. Now we're doing the exact same thing down here with this new decimal variable, and we're again looking in the data set, going to the tables collection, going to wholesale info table in that collection, and the rows collection of that table, and then going to the price column for that particular row.
And even though the data that's streaming back and forth between these two systems it's happening over HTTP, and so it's therefore it's text that's going back and forth. That it's based on XML allows us to preserve the type safety of the underlying data. So we can represent a decimal as XML with the value of that decimal represented as a string, and then closing that out saying, okay, that's a decimal. When it comes back, there's no conversion of that data from a string to a decimal. That's going to happen by the underlying libraries responsible for serializing as XML, which makes it a lot easier for us to code, because we don't have to assume we're receiving a text file and start converting all these values and perform error checking against the values to make sure that there isn't an out of bounds character that's going to hurt casting a decimal as a string into a real decimal.
Which is a lot different than what you do today on like ASP pages and form actions and stuff, because everything comes at you as a string.
Yes.
And you've got to do something to it, turn it into a not string if you don't want it to be a string.
Yeah, so that's going to save us a lot of time.
So we're seeing a simple, pretty straightforward active server page below this. This is kind of our measly, this function here is our L word rep. I think this will be easier to see. This function here is our measly local business rules. Basically, the only business rule that we have defined for this system is that we mark up every wholesale price 20%. And that's just so we can demonstrate that there's some local stuff going on here.
It takes 3 paragraphs in the business plan to describe this markup. But just one line of code.
Down here, we've just got a little bit of HTML that's a little bit of lousy HTML by me that's spitting out kind of what is actually going on. And then we'll take a look here in the browser and show you what really what this really looks like. Okay, so here we are at our first page, the default page. We can just enter the ISBN number, and I'm going to submit my query here. Now remember, the page that I'm submitting to is going to be talking to proxy classes and out across the internet, web services in New York and Loosejaw and parts unknown, and then also doing some coding with some local, or doing some interaction with some local functions that do some business rules locally. So we're submitting the query.
And you'll see also the same delay with the ASPX files as well, because those ASP pages are also being compiled down to intermediate language. That's
right, because the ASP.NET is not an interpreted model anymore.
Correct.
It's now a compiled model. But like I said, we didn't see you go through a compile step on those files,
No.
but the first time you touch them, once they've been modified.
The first request is going to compile it, and then all other requests will just go to the already compiled intermediate language code, the bytecode that comes from that.
Okay.
So here I've kind of broken into 4 tables, excuse my ugly HTML, and to really kind of underscore where the data in this lookup.aspx page is coming from. Now this first one, all you active server programmers will recognize as being pretty familiar. This is coming right out of the request object. This is what I typed into the last page. So this is just being passed along from the last page to this page. It gets more interesting down here. Here's where we're actually getting the title of the book. Now remember, I just typed in the ISBN number. I'm getting the title of this book and the wholesale price of this book back from the wholesale info proxy class, which again is a proxy class on my local machine talking via SOAP across the internet to a web service that's doing some querying of a database, sending data back to me, and then SOAP's automatically interpreting that and turning that into, in this case, a string and a decimal that are available for use in my local programming. Here we have in the next table, we've got the review. The guy didn't actually like this review, this book. This is again gotten from a different proxy class. This one going actually to the book reviewers up in Loosejaw again via SOAP over the internet to the web service and back to us automatically, and coming back as a string that's available for programming in our local page. And then here I am actually just doing my kind of lame function that I wrote locally to mark up the wholesale price, and this is just some local system business logic. I included this last table because it really, I think it underscores how the whole is greater than the sum of the parts with .NET and specifically with web services. We've got one system in one city and country subscribing to services that are offered by two other systems in, totally far off places, subscribing to that information, bringing that information into its system, and then presenting the sum of that information with some actually extra stuff that we have to offer at our local system, the bookseller system, and presenting that to its customers as this useful, saleable item. So what we've got here is, I think, a pretty good example of how to write your first web services and your first .NET application that subscribes to web services.
Well, thanks. Now, when I look at this, especially like on this last screen here, functionally, I don't really see anything there that I couldn't have done prior to .NET. What exactly is .NET bringing to the picture here to make this so exciting? You're getting so excited.
Easy. I mean, I spent 6 weeks writing a program that would, very cautiously negotiate back and forth data files that were getting transferred from some different kind of database that was at a warehouse in New Jersey that was in a different kind of database than the database that I had at my local system. And we had to work out the protocol, and you're going to send, okay, it's going to be comma separated and strings will be in quotes, but numbers won't be in quotes, and they're all going to be character return separated on the next line, and my automatic FTP script's going to grab that file and send it over here at this time, and you got to be open at this time, and if it doesn't send it, the error trapping will tell it to send it tomorrow, and uncheck all the stuff in the database, and blah, 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 blah. This took me, 40 minutes here, and I'm talking at the same time.
You weren't typing, though.
I wasn't typing, that's true.
So
to actually interface with two machines are totally separate machines, potentially could be totally far apart, and not only am I just able to interface and exchange data with them, but I'm able to do it with the standard programming approach that I'm used to working with. So I instantiate a component to query my local database, or I instantiate some class or whatever that I need to do locally, or get something back from some function or library I've built. In this case, I'm just instantiating a proxy class, which is getting me this data from this faraway place, and I'm working with that proxy class in the exact same way that I'm working with a data set that's returned from a proxy class in the exact same way that I would work with a data set that's returned from a local query and a command object, etc., to a local database. Those two things are exactly the same to me, and I can work with them exactly the same. So there's no special translation, no special protocol, no 6 weeks of Ian scratching his head. I'm just programming with the stuff that I normally know how to do.
Plus, another difference here is where the book reviewer site didn't really have an awful lot of information, the book wholesaler site, there's a lot more information in their database that they probably aren't wanting the bookseller to have access to. And so if you were doing a database connection, then the book wholesaler would have had to create a totally separate database just for that purpose, so you wouldn't have access to those sort of things.
Well, and I think that really implies one of the big values of .NET and web services. I think one of the great strengths that this has to offer businesses is, say that there are businesses already out there whose key goal in life is not to share information with you. They've got some business plan that they're doing, and they're doing their business, and they're storing their data, and they don't want to be bothered to work out some elaborate scheme of sharing data with some new partner or whatever. This allows us to really easily insert a simple component that we wrote in just a couple minutes here that will selectively pull out the data or assemble or process or whatever, the data that we need to actually share, and then we'll share that with whoever needs access to it. And by the way, you can totally make it secure. You can use Windows security. You can use SSL, you can use cookies, lock down by IP address. You can do all kinds of stuff to make sure that Jason isn't out here hacking on the internet to play with your web services. So I think what you're saying there, it makes a lot of sense, and it really strikes a chord with me and this .NET concept, because these businesses don't want to focus a whole lot on sharing information. That's not the point of their business. That's not what they do. They don't want to be web portals or any of that stuff. They just want to do what they do and share their information that they need to with other companies that can actually make use of it.
Their core competencies.
Yes.
And actually, to kind of take that a different direction, in some cases where we are actually linking Company A and Company B together on behalf of, let's say, Company A, and they have Company B's agreement to to do this. In the past, we would have had to have understood Company B's internal systems, built the software ourselves, deploy it onto their systems, test it on their systems, and that was due to the complexity of the system as a whole and the code that was managing the interaction back and forth. Because of the separation of the underlying transport of the data from the sort of upper layer application code, it makes it simpler to develop one end of that system independently of the other. And so what this means is that an IT department that heretofore was too busy to participate in a 6-week software development cycle can now invest a couple of days in developing their end of that system, and then we can just link to that, which may give Company B, if Company A and Company B are begrudgingly sharing data back and forth because they're competitors, but they may need to do this, for their mutual survival. Company B can feel a lot better about not having Company A's vendor going through all of their internal systems. They can kind of wall themselves off a little bit. This all runs over HTTP. They probably already have that port open for their own website, so there's no real security breach there that is introduced into the system. As long as good coding practices and good application design is taking place, security doesn't really become much of an issue.
Okay. Well, thanks. I mean, I think your demo really kind of hit home and showed the key pieces that I felt were necessary for this first .NET application, and I hope that our viewing audience was able to get the information they needed out of it. Now, we're going to take and package up all the source code that you used here and make it available both from my site as well as from the MSDN Download Center, so people can access in that fashion.
Yes.
So we'll.
And the world can review my code.
There you go.
Just remember, change it from SA and no password to something else first.
Okay. Well, thanks. Well, hopefully this provided you some deep technical information that you need to better understand what you need to do in order to develop your first .NET application, specifically using the web services. And while we didn't show VS.NET, in the future we'll have an episode that focuses on what Visual Studio.NET provides for you and how we can even greater simplify the development process. But in the meantime, go ahead and use Notepad, use the command line tools. It helps you a little get closer to the code, understand a little bit more what's going on beneath the covers, and then you can start bubble up to the more easier click and point tools like VS.NET and other things to make these sort of applications that much easier to write. Well, we've still got some more information for you coming later on, so stay tuned.
As you can see with the .NET Show, multimedia is fast becoming a popular medium to provide technical training and information. With me today is Kelly Renner. She is a program manager at Microsoft in the multimedia group that provides content for the MSDN, TechNet, and business websites. Kelly, welcome.
Hello. Hello,
Thanks
Erica.
for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you do for the multimedia group?
I work on a group of program managers, and program managers are basically people who run interference for the business owners of websites to get features up that they request. And I kind of handle the multimedia end of that and work with the developers to make features come to life on the web.
Can you tell me a little bit about some of the specific projects you're working on?
I can. I'm currently working on a radio pilot that is measuring the first phase of the radio pilot. We measured basic desire for radio as a format. So we blindly surveyed people to see what they thought about just listening to content and getting away from their PC and digesting information that way. We got the results we wanted to move into phase 2, which means we had customer satisfaction with that. And for phase 2, we are looking at the features and the kind of content we're delivering and seeing whether or not people want to see different things up there. And that's going to go live on April 17th on the TechNet and business websites at Microsoft.
So what is the type of content with internet radio? What exactly are you providing?
Right now we're giving a buffet style of, you can get SQL Server, you can get security, you can get .NET, and people can go through that list and check off what they want to hear, push play, go back to work, and get their information in the background.
So you've hired actual DJs or DJ-like speakers to provide the voice for these?
Yes, we have professional voice talent on it and some in-house Microsoft talent. And experts. Bob Herbold's on there talking to the business audience, and we have Robert Hess doing some .NET stuff. So guys, check it out.
So do you have other multimedia background? Did you do any other sort of multimedia work outside of Microsoft?
Yes, I did. I did actually analog audio work in a recording studio. So I have a background in audio and video production and used to record heavy metal bands for their demo tapes and that kind of stuff. I used to run around and mic double bass drums, and that was kind of the stuff that got me interested in audio production and audio engineering. And then by chance, my good friend Kate Connor, who worked at Microsoft, said, "There's a job over here as a project manager if you want to check it out." And I did, and I absolutely fell in love with it because there's all this technology and computers and all the great things. And then digital media just started coming into play. Well, I'm sure it was heavily into play in Microsoft, but it started coming heavily into play about '97 when I just got in there. And it was a great opportunity to just
Get your foot in the door.
Yes.
Yeah. So you did sound for heavy metal bands. Any certain names out there that you could mention?
I probably, under the grounds that it might incriminate my future here at Microsoft, I don't think I should be mentioning the kind of music I used to play, but I did. There was, it was a really awful time. I can tell you one time that I was recording when I really decided this wasn't what I wanted to do with my life, I was recording a band of weightlifters that were into heavy metal, and they were and their song was "Tough Enough for Love." And that's when I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. And they would have buzzing, and what is this buzz? What is this buzz you hear? And I would actually go in and put the finger down on the bass string and say, "Now there won't be any more buzz."
What's your problem?
Because it was fret buzz, You hold that string down. So
do you play instruments yourself?
I'm retired, officially retired bass player. I played for a long time, and
What kind of band were you in?
I was in a very avant-garde, incredibly pretentious, kind of math rock band was what.
Math rock. What is
Math
that?
rock. It's a lot of counting odd time signatures. Like you're not going to go back to that bar until you go through these 58 measures, and no note can repeat itself, and everything's going to be a 9, then it's going to be a 7, and you got to turn it upside down, and then you're going to do one Latin beat, and it was all this calculating, which was really difficult, but incredibly fun. It was a great time.
But you gave that up.
I gave that up, yeah. Didn't really bring home a lot of, but if you want to buy a CD, you can buy them out there on the web. They're out there somewhere.
What's the name of your band?
The band was Control Freak. That was the band that actually put out the CD.
And that's available to buy.
You can buy it. You just search on, there's some Control Freak software out there too, but you can do I'm sorry, I shouldn't say Google. Can I say Google? You can do a Google search for Control Freak and music, and it'll come up. That's what it is.
What do you see as a vision of multimedia in the future? Where would you like to see that go?
With the radio pilot, the real reason why I jumped on that project is because I saw that we can make content that you didn't need text for, that you could totally go mobile with, because the hardware was already in place to support it. And I saw that opportunity, that I really wanted to jump on board with that, and getting the new compression technologies down to the lowest possible K per second coming through, and getting really mobile with audio. And then on the other hand, I really like the idea of these incredibly complicated simulations and, giving customers chances to work things out in a simulation style, like a big migration project or something like that, before actually doing it as real business. So I like to be on this end of the spectrum and this end, and not too much of the 56K stuff.
Right. Kelly, thanks for joining me today. It's been great.
Thanks for having me, Erica. It's been a pleasure.
And Kelly, if you would actually look at Erica when you said thank you, it's a pleasure. That'd be great.
Kelly, thanks for joining me today. It's been great.
Thanks for having me, Erica. It's been a pleasure.
Sorry.
Hey, I did it.
Well, Kelly, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
It's been great.
All right. Can I go now?
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the .NET Show. We hope you enjoy the information we presented to you.
And stay tuned for the next episode, where we'll talk about the Hailstorm web services.
And until then, we'll see you on the web.